Good morning. Good morning. Thanks again for being here. Week 2, we braved a little bit of weather from yesterday. Everybody that's here either is not a hardcore LSU or Clemson fan or found a way to drag themselves out of bed. So I'm going to start by saying congratulations, Tigers fans, and I'm sorry, Tigers fans also. But I have a good joke that we can play off of last night. So up until I think about 1950-something or so, Clemson University was actually called Clem University, C-L-E-M. And they added the S-O-N onto it at that time. And the S-O-N stands for chivalry, honor, and knowledge. Another. I'm still working on them, guys. Again, I will take all comers if you've got any good ones that you want to share that are decently clean. I'll be happy to use them. Again, thanks for being here. Week 2, we're going to talk about Mark chapter 2. But I want to go over a couple of things from last week. So we started off with a bang, 91 guys here last week. But we actually, we've got lots of good response. People who said this really sparked an interest in Mark for them, so they were going to dive deeper. Had some other guys come up to me and tell me, my men's group that I had has kind of dissolved. So this is great because I was looking for a way to connect with more guys at the church. So again, all good stuff. But we did get a comment. Somebody asked kind of what was the goal of this? What's the goal of Tuesday morning? Which made us realize we never really told you the goal. And I'll be honest, I think that's because we don't really know what the goal of Tuesday morning is right now, right? So I think we wanted to make this successful, wanted to make it engaging, but I think it's kind of part of a broader men's ministry, and what we are hoping, which you can kind of see on the up on the screen here, is that on Tuesday mornings, I'm hoping that from this, kind of playing off of what Josh said last week, is that we can kind of get to know Jesus, know ourselves, and know one another, right? And that's part of kind of a bigger vision I see of kind of connecting relationally and growing spiritually. And I wish I could tell you that I came up with those words and I'm some great orator, but that's not. I stole that from somebody off of a podcast. So anyways, the reason I wanted to go over that is because this I think kind of encompasses the reason you're here, right? So a lot of guys can go to church on Sunday because that's how they grew up, or they think that's the right thing to do, or their wife tells them they're going to church on Sunday. It could be any one of those things, but you're all here on a Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. being intentional about growing closer with each other and growing closer with Christ. So I thank you for that. That is really what we're hoping to really drive home from a broader men's ministry standpoint. And don't downplay that either. I'm not trying to butter anybody up. I want you to actually think about that. You are being intentional about your time with each other and your time with the Lord. Another question that came up after last week. We didn't get to all of our questions that we had at the table. Understandable, okay? Some of these questions are going to have longer answers, and they're going to have a lot more discussion than you may have in the 20, 25 minutes that you have allotted to you. That's okay. What our hope is that these questions will maybe spark some ideas or spark some thoughts that when you go home, you either think about it or reach out to the guys that are in your group, the guys that you're sitting at the table with, or reach out to somebody who didn't make it here this morning, maybe have that conversation with them. My last note, or my last thing I wanted to say this morning before I hand it or say a prayer, actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to let you say the prayer this morning. Oh, man, okay. As we kind of grow, or as we kind of try to evolve the men's ministry more at the church, we've all got passions, we've all got things we really like to do. If you have a passion that you think would be a great, or could turn into a great event for the men's ministry, come and talk to us about it, okay? Knowing full well when you come to talk to me about it, I'm going to say, that's great. Go for it, okay? I'm not asking you to give me ideas so that we can do it. I want all of us to be engaged in part of this, okay? So if you have a passion that something that you really enjoy, that you think could be a great event for all of us, could get more guys in from the church or more guys in from the community, please, let's talk about that. I'd love to explore it. Okay? Now, I hand it over to you.
All right, good morning, guys. Good morning. So good to have all of you here today. We are going to do the second chapter this morning, but before we got going, I thought one of the things might be helpful is to give us a little bit of a context for the study we're doing. And so I've added some visual aids that we're going to use today. If you can pop those up, Andy. Oh, okay, there we go. The country of Israel is about the size of the state of New Jersey. So it's not a huge place, but it is a very different country from top to bottom, very much like our country is going from east to west. You hit a lot of geography, topography, and things. Up here, obviously, is the Sea of Galilee. Down here is the Dead Sea. It's about 90 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem, which is right there. It's about the same distance from here to Dalton. So you can get a little bit of a sense with that. You do have a mountainous region here as well as at the top. Did I lose sound? Anyway, I'll talk loudly then with that. So you can get a sense of the country there and about its size and location, obviously. Andy, if you can go to the next slide on me. There you go. This is obviously the Sea of Galilee area. Obviously, there we go. Obviously, for Jesus' ministry, most of his ministry is around the Galilee. You'll notice Nazareth is here. Capernaum is here, which is Jesus' home base around the Sea of Galilee. His home, obviously, in Nazareth is 30 miles from Nazareth to Capernaum. With that, the Sea of Galilee itself is about 13 miles north to south, and 8 miles in its widest place from east to west. Next one. City of Tiberias. This is just to give you a perspective. Again, this is the anchor city on the Sea of Galilee currently, and you can get a sense of the city there. Next slide, please. And this is actually looking from the other side. What we call in the Bible, when it talks about going to the other side, this is the other side. This is the side of Corsi. And so you go from, this is on the eastern side, and then the western side over there, obviously, is where Tiberias and the other cities are. And so this will give you a sense of the fertile farmland that is there. I have a feeling when I take people there, most of the time they say, well, we thought it was going to be wilderness and desert everywhere. But reality is the northern part of the country is very fertile. And so a lot of farmland, a lot of fertility up there related to the growth of flowers and all kinds of things. Next one. This is St. Peter. This is at the entrance of the city of Capernaum. Even though Peter himself was born in Bethsaida, his family actually was rooted in Capernaum. And his mother-in-law in particular there. And when you go to Capernaum now, you'll go to the home site of Peter. And that is where the home base of Jesus was. Capernaum was a city of about 1,500 people. It was a main thoroughfare related to commerce. And so it was a booming, bustling city, and it was also representative internationally of things. And so Capharnaum, as it is the village of Nahum. And we don't know who Nahum was. It's not the prophet with that. Next one. And we know that was Peter because at his feet is the St. Peter's fish. This is, if you go to Israel and you go to the Sea of Galilee, one of the things that they will offer you everywhere you go is a St. Peter's fish. This is a tilapia. It is one of many varieties of tilapia around the world. And so you have that there. And then the next picture is a picture of St. Peter's Catholic Church. that was built in 1990. So it's a very new structure. It looks kind of like a spaceship if you're there. But underneath it, you will find, in the next slide, is the ruins of Peter's mother-in-law's home. Now, this is not the actual ruins, but that's the location by tradition where that home was, and where Peter and Jesus and the disciples would have worked out of with that. There have been actually 2 ancient churches that have been built on this site, but that is what we have there. And then the next couple of pictures, this is the synagogue. There were 2 synagogues, ancient synagogues that were built there. This is the 4th century synagogue that was there. And while this is not the actual site where Jesus would have been, he would have been on that site. That was from around 600 BC until the time of Jesus. It was the temple, the synagogue rather, for that area. And then the final picture is looking at from the Mount of Beatitudes across to the Sea of Galilee, and the Golan Heights, which is on the Jordan side, are over there, as you can see. And so just to give you a sense of that, and this is obviously, again, you can see the trees, the olive trees that are all along this mountainside now. But a wonderful place to go. And so anyway, just to give you a little bit of the sense of geography and topography of the area that we're here. You'll notice in chapter 2, and if you have turned to that, you can take a look at the breakdown of the book. In chapter 2, as you were reading, one of the things you begin to notice is that there is an ongoing theme of controversy in this chapter between Jesus and the spiritual leaders of the church, who appear to be jealous of Jesus because people are turning towards Jesus instead of them. And so they oppose his ministry, kind of from the very beginning, because word is getting out. If you remember last week, there was the healing of the individual. Word gets out, and all of a sudden people start coming to find Jesus. And so we have the leaders of the church are not very happy about that. So in this chapter, you actually have 4 different stories that deal with conflict between Jesus and the heads of the church, because everything he does are things that they're not happy with. The first one, obviously, is for forgiving of sins of the paralytic man. And you only could do that. God was only able to do that. And so representative in this Gospel of Mark is the reality that Jesus is God's presence in the world at that time. And so he has taken the authority that he has as God in our presence. And of course, the folks aren't happy with that. Then you have Jesus ministers to the tax collectors. And those are the sinners, it says. And the tax collectors obviously were not favorite people of the people. And he invites then one of the tax collectors, Levi, or as we know him as Matthew, to be a disciple. And then Jesus is questioned about fasting and its practice. John's followers come, or the leaders of the church begin to say, well, John's followers fast. Why don't you? And he gives them a response to that. And then the final one is the question about the Sabbath and who is in control of that. And Mark tells us in both the fasting and also in the Sabbath that it is the Lord who has control over that, not the church, not the leaders of the church. So today we're going to hear, first of all, about who these legal experts were. Now, you'll have legal experts mentioned throughout the scriptures. The Pharisees are one of the first groups, and these are the keepers of the law. Those were mostly commoners, and they believed in angels and demons and hell and afterlife, but they had very little political power, but they were yet those who interpreted the law for the people. If people had a question about the law, they would go to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees would say, this is what the rabbinic law says. This is how you're supposed to live it. In some places and in some traditions, the Pharisees were called rabbis. Then you have the Sadducees. These were folks that were more aristocratic. If you were a Sadducee, you were a part of the Sanhedrin, which was the governing body for the people. They, again, were very similar to the Pharisees in that they were the keepers of the law. They were the ones that helped interpret that for people. But they did not believe in angels and demons and hell and afterlife. But they did have a lot of political power with the Romans. They were very tight with the Romans. And so they were often called priests. And so you have these two groups primarily, and then you have other groups, the scribes, who were the ones that just basically scribed the law for the people. And so these are the ones that from this point on are going to be questioning Jesus and all he does. And ultimately, these are the groups that begin to go after him. And it happens very early in each of the Gospels. Now, the first story is the healing of the paralytic man. Things in our lives sometimes make us ill. And in the day of Jesus, being ill was not only having a disease, but it was also being unclean, not following the law, and not being able to live and go to synagogue and those kinds of things because of the things that they had done. Or and you know, when you have many stories also in the Bible where Jesus is asked, you know, why is this person ill? What did they do to make themselves ill? Or what did their mom or dad do to make them ill? And of course, Jesus says, you know, it's not that. You can be made whole if you come to me. And so they do that. And so he heals a number of folks. But one of this story I think that's interesting is the persistence of the friends. In this story, this paralytic man is unable to get up and go. And Jesus is so well known in this area that at the time they try to go and take him to this paralyzed man to Jesus in Capernaum. And we assume at this point is probably at St. Peter's house. At his mother-in-law's house, and they're there. And there's so many people there that not only is it crowded inside, but it's crowded outside too. And these friends decide they're going to take this guy to Jesus that he might be healed. And so the friends go out of their way to do that, and they weren't going to let anything get in their way. And so they actually take the man to the roof of the house. Now, the roof of the house was easily accessible because many of the homes had stairs that actually went up. The upstairs, the roof of the house was often an additional room, basically. And as we have patios and decks and other things on our house, that would be similar to what they had. And so especially during the hottest time of the year, it was the place to go and sit upstairs and feel the breezes coming off the mountains from the north and coming down into the Sea of Galilee area in Capernaum. And so they are there. And so they are there, and they bring the guy. They can't get in. They go to the roof. You know what they do. They tear it apart, and they drop the man into the room. And Jesus sees this, and he says to the man, because their faith, the faith of the guys who brought you here, you are forgiven. You're a forgiven man. And again, the people that are the legal experts begin to question that, because why again does Jesus have that authority? Nobody has that authority but God. And so by forgiving the man's sin, Jesus is releasing him and letting him go. But you'll notice that he forgives his sin before he heals him. And so he has that, and he heals the guy at that point after his sins have been forgiven. And the scripture tends to lead us to believe that Jesus did this first. He didn't heal him first and then forgive his sins. He forgave his sins because that was his greatest need. Healing his sins was more important than healing his body, because it is his soul that Jesus is concerned about. It is his relationship with God that is worth worrying about. And of course, this is blasphemy on the part of those who are the leaders. But it also shares with us again that Jesus was God in our presence. By forgiving the man's sin before healing him, Jesus knew that it was his greatest need, and forgiveness was more important than the healing. Greatest need was for spiritual healing to take place in this man's life. And the man, the Son of Man, as Jesus is often known in the scriptures, has the authority on earth of forgiving sins. Now, the other story that we're going to take a look at is Jesus ministers to the tax collectors and Levi, who he invites then to become a disciple. Jesus calls a man of low social status because he is a tax collector. And interestingly, in the hierarchy of culture and society at that time, a tax collector was below slaves and indentured servants. Below slaves and indentured servants. So the tax collector was not obviously somebody that was the favorite of the people. And it was, tax collectors had bad reputations. They had bad reputations because they were sellouts to the Roman government. These were people that were just like neighbors and friends who took jobs with the Romans. And the Jews who worked for the Romans did it often for personal gain. And so while there were a lot of people struggling to make ends meet and to do it, there were many people that were working for the Roman government that were doing very, very well. And the reason they were is because they were collecting money beyond what the taxes actually were. They were taking advantage of the people, and they would get their cut of it. And as long as the head tax collector, as you see in Zacchaeus later on in the story, got his money, then what you charged everybody else, it was fine with them, because all the head tax collector was accountable to Rome. And so it was just kind of this pyramid of people getting money. And if they asked you for the money, you really had no choice but to give it to them. Many of the tax collectors were cruel. They mistreated the Jews, and because the Romans would protect them. Because guess who wanted the money ultimately? Caesar. It is Caesar's money that we're talking about. And so they severely taxed the Jews. The Jews harbored bitterness towards them. They hated them, but there was very, very little they could do. And so once you chose to be a tax collector, you knew that your only friends were going to be other tax collectors. They were going to be the ones that were also outcast. Those were going to be the ones that were also not welcome in many places. And because of being a tax collector, you were not welcome at the synagogue. So just think about having a job that would exclude you from being a part of the faith community. And so for Jesus to go and to sit down and to spend time with and develop relationships with these folks and to pick one of those despised tax collectors as a follower, and not just a follower, but as a disciple with that. Generally, someone who was of the lowest moral character, who was willing to get ahead at the expense of others, and who desired material wealth, were the folks that actually became tax collectors. So for Jesus to ask Levi to follow him, Levi had a decision to make. And some of us get caught in that decision making in our own lives. We're offered jobs and opportunities. I had a guy in my office not too long ago that was offered the dream job, but it meant he would sacrifice his family for it. Basically, on the road Monday through Friday, on call 24 hours a day, many of the jobs that a lot of you guys have. But Levi had to make the decision, am I going to sacrifice all the wealth, all the power, all the authority that I have to do as I want to do under the Roman rule, or am I going to follow Jesus? And he would not keep his life and follow Jesus. He'd have to let it go. And so Jesus wasn't afraid of the backlash of choosing someone that was very unpopular. Someone that's not perfect. Someone that's a sinner. Somebody like me. Somebody like you. Jesus picked someone that maybe somebody else would not see as beneficial or helpful to the ministry. So he can take the lowest outcast of a person and he can transform their lives. One of the things that we talk about in the mission statement of the United Methodist Church is going into the world, baptizing people in the name of the Father and the Son, and transforming the world as a part of that. And Jesus is transforming the world at this point in time by picking someone that nobody else would have picked. Around your tables, there are some questions. We're not going to deal with specifically with the other two topics today with that, but you may have some time around there. We'll talk a little bit about the Sabbath around your tables. But you have questions you can go with, and you've got 30 minutes to spend around the table now discussing what you read and what you've heard so far. I prayed yesterday, and so I thought that would be getting me through the week. So let us have this word of prayer as we begin. Oh God, we do thank you that you have called us to this place this day, that you have enlivened our lives with your presence. We thank you for the friendship, the fellowship that we find around these tables, and for the opportunity to learn and to know about you. We ask that you support the men of this church and this community, that you would give us good wisdom and direction in all that we do, and that we would be shining examples of what you have called us to be and do in this world. Through your Son we pray. Amen.